It's great to be back for the second in this, for the second in this series of talks here at CAS. The first one, I don't know how many of you were at that, was with Jeff Lynne. And I actually saw today that Cedars, the company that he set up and runs, and the company we talked about, and the company you had a lot of questions about, was named top tech investor and top seed stage investor in the UK. So I guess we're doing something right with these talks. As we just heard, our guest this evening is Debbie Wosskow, founder and CEO of Love Home Swap. Debbie also chairs the sharing economy's trade body, someone who I think very much ticks all the boxes for this series. An entrepreneur, an investor, someone who continues to work closely together with the government. So I think a realist, if you like, when it comes to how much support is really forthcoming from the government for entrepreneurs and for those with good ideas in this space. So let me stop there and start this as an interview, as a conversation. I'll run about 25 minutes or so, and then I want you to have a really good crack as well and throw your questions, Debbie. Right, I started with Jeff Lynne like this, so let me start this way with you. And that was really in about 30 seconds or less to pitch your business.
Yeah.
Clearly you pitched your business many years ago to VCs, some of whom hated the idea.
Yeah.
How do you pitch it now?
So the way that I describe it is that Love Home Swap is a site for homeowners who want to swap their homes with people like them around the world. So depending on your perspective, it's an Airbnb for grown-ups, or it's reinventing the timeshare model for people who own homes and want to stay in homes when they go on holiday.
And you've said you want to be the home exchange what Airbnb is to rentals.
Yes.
When will you get to that point, do you think?
Well, we're in a reasonably good place at the moment. So the idea for the business, for those of you who've read a little bit about it, is that I had always travelled for work and life. I'm an entrepreneur and I'd run different businesses. And about 5 years ago, I took a very expensive holiday with very small children where we stayed in a hotel. And you may remember this stage, I know you're a parent too. Very, very tiny children. So you spend a lot of time with the lights off, trying not to wake them up, feeding them with the TV on, And it felt like it was rubbish and it was expensive. In the meantime, my home in West London was sitting empty. And this is a true story. On the flight on the way home, I watched the film The Holiday, which you may have seen, which is the original home swapping movie. And I thought, does that even exist? Because actually, I wish that I had just swapped my home instead of stayed in a very cramped hotel room. And then the entrepreneurial can't leave it alone thing kicks in. And I looked around and it did exist, but it was as old as the hills, and it was ripe for what we now call the sharing economy, but we didn't then, type makeover. When we launched the site, it had 250 homes on it, which were mostly my friends. We now have almost 150,000 homes around the world, and that gives us scale in marketplace terms. People home swap for one of two reasons. So either they know where they want to go and when they want to go, cousins, wedding, Los Angeles, June, and there, it's all about having enough inventory, so size really does matter. Do you have homes in places where they want to go? But the other reason that people home swap, to use the online dating analogy, is it's a little bit like flirting. Yeah. So they'll go onto the site and they won't know where they want to go. They think, oh, it could be Cape Town or Copenhagen. So then it's about surfacing interesting suggestions. So at 150,000 homes, we're not Airbnb, no. But to that extent, we won't ever be Airbnb, in that we're all about building a community and a club. It's not just a purely transactional holiday-based website, it's a community of homeowners.
Well, tell me, Debbie, why then were the VCs, or some of the VCs, so negative when you first pitched the idea? Did they just not get this concept of the sharing economy back then?
I think we should absolutely remember how much progress has been made in the last 5 years. and we all benefit from the Airbnb and to some extent the Uber afterglow. So I was roundly told by a range of very well-known investors that two things: nobody would ever stay in a stranger's home, and nobody would ever have a stranger to stay in their home. If you fast forward towards this summer, where my mother, who's not an early adopter of anything, stayed in an Airbnb, I think we shouldn't forget how all of this has become mainstream. And also what we see really as the granddaddy of the sharing economy, eBay, which has got us all familiar now with this notion that we can trust a stranger because of a review that gives that stranger 4.7 out of 5, or whatever the rating is. This is all reasonably new currency. So I think 5 years ago the sharing economy was not fashionable. It definitely is much more mainstream as an activity with Sharing Economy UK, which we can come on to talk about. We recently just completed a piece of research with other esteemed academic institutions, not this one, that said that 30% of British adults are now participating in sharing economy services. And when we tried to measure that 5 years ago, it didn't even exist as a category.
Do you think society has become more inclined to share things, or was there always that latent desire that's been realised by the arrival of all these tech platforms?
So 2008, where people started to think a lot harder about the assets that they owned and how to sweat them, the growth of digital platforms that enable you to share at scale with strangers, and also something that people generally don't talk about but has been absolutely critical in the development of my business, which is the development of online payment gateways. When I first set the business up, we needed to try and get a merchant account that meant that we needed to have £2 million on deposit, and it was incredibly complicated. Fast forward now, where we use Stripe, multi-currency, multi-platform, they hold onto our money on a rolling deposit of 12 hours. That's utterly transformed the ability of sharing platforms to get off the ground. I don't know whether there's a social, have we become nicer? I sort of get asked that a bit, or do I feel like Brits are good at sharing? I think there is something in the mix about a sense of community, or I don't want to overplay it, but wanting to know your neighbours, or feeling neighbourly about things that helps.
Yeah, but that could go away as quickly as it came.
Away.
And do you worry about that?
No, because I think that the combination, there are two sides to the sharing economy. There's the money end of things, so are you making money and saving money? And there's the experience. And all data demonstrates that those two are of equal importance. So as well as the, I've stayed in an Airbnb and it's cheaper, or I've done a love home swap and I've saved $4,000, which is the average saving for when you home swap. It's also this money can't buy experience of, I've stayed in a neighbourhood, I've stayed somewhere that isn't touristed, I've live swapped. I mean, that's what drives home swapping, is being able, in the To Kill a Mockingbird analogy, to put yourself in someone else's skin and walk around in it, because you live their life according to their top tips about how to live for a time.
Is the sharing economy in any way controversial to you, or is it all good in your mind?
Well, I am, and indeed should be, its biggest advocate in the UK, given that I'm the government's advisor on the sharing economy. I wrote the independent report, I chair the trade association that now has 50 members. And I genuinely feel that allowing ordinary people to make money and save money from the things they already own is a very good thing indeed.
When people, I guess like me, try gratuitously for events like this to shoot it down for the sake of argument, what are some of the most compelling arguments you've heard from those people trying to shoot it down, or trying to say, look, we need to be a lot more wary of this than we are?
Well, I don't find any of them terribly compelling. Okay. However, I think the things that I'm generally asked about or challenged on are trust and safety. I mean, that's the absolute fundamental question about the sharing economy. Back to my original experience of fundraising, can you trust a stranger in your home? What happens if someone sets fire to it? What happens to, when the Uber driver goes on a rampage, etc., etc.? I think that's a very commonly asked question. The flip of that is for people who are engaging with sharing platforms, either because they're working as an Uber driver or they're working as a cleaner on Hassle.com, or they're selling things on Etsy, or they're an Airbnb host for 20 days a year. What are the safeguards? There are some big structural questions and sort of geopolitical questions about the world of work. How will it change?
Yeah.
What happens when people work in a way that isn't really defined as work? They don't go to offices, and they don't have jobs for life, and they don't have healthcare, and they don't have, and is all of that a race to the bottom? And I think that there are answers to all of those questions, but those are the most commonly asked.
And do you include in that pricing and the way people get paid? And I know this has become a big issue. It's become a big issue in the US. I believe Hillary Clinton has got involved in this discussion as well. And I imagine people in our government raise that as an issue as well. What do you say?
They do, but I think that the UK is genuinely in a really exciting position with these issues. And be clear that in the time that the sharing economy has come to the forefront, we've had a coalition and now a Tory government. And that means that the buzzwords for them are around micro-entrepreneurship, and they're very supportive, as this government has been, and the coalition government before it, of the startup community. We have Tech City, we get an awful lot of airtime, and when you spend time in other countries, I was in Silicon Valley 2 weeks ago, you realise that we're genuinely in a great position in terms of interacting with and influencing government. Without being too technical about it, I think the way that the world of work works in the UK, and the way that regulation works in the UK, and the way that we have a welfare state, and the way that we don't have some of the issues that would drive a Hillary Clinton to talk about the evil that is the gig economy, because that's inextricably linked with things like access to healthcare. So it feels like we're in a very good position. We're also, given the, we have managed to get 15 minutes through this without talking about Brexit, which makes a change from every conversation I've had in the last 2 weeks. We are also in a great position versus the rest of Europe, because of the way that we're able to employ people and the way that people are able to work. So,
do you think we should leave Europe?
No, I'm an inner. I was a signatory of the letter. I mean, it's a separate topic, but I think that we would be mad to do anything to disrupt the digital single market that gives European startups, particularly a business like mine that is instantly pan-European, as are many sharing economy platforms. So, again, separate topic, but if you were to survey, and one was done last week by the Coalition for the Digital Economy, which is another lobby group for digital in the UK, we're profoundly inners. There's not a real Brexiter amongst us.
You mentioned Silicon Valley, and clearly the big names, the household names, are a lot of big US players, the Ubers, the Airbnbs. And I want to come back to the way you started in just a second as well, but do you think of the UK as an entrepreneurial nation? Do you think we are disruptive enough? Are we prepared to be disrupted? Some people wouldn't think of us as an entrepreneurial nation.
Well, just to unpick that a little bit, because we all have our own personal experience of entrepreneurship. And that's definitely not mine, but I'm from a very entrepreneurial family. No one in my family has a job. My mother, my father, my grandparents, everybody's always run their own businesses. And so my backdrop to life has been, from a very early age, understanding how business worked. And we are indeed a nation of shopkeepers. And I'm from a Jewish immigrant family where everybody worked the markets, and that's what I did as a kid. And so I just don't have that context. I do think that there is a separate answer to your question, which is, can UK businesses disrupt at scale? Now, many of the big players in the sharing economy are actually European businesses. BlaBlaCar, which is by far the biggest car sharing platform in the world, is French and has a lot of operations over here. My own business, Hassle.com, which was recently sold as a UK-built business. I think there are some structural issues around access to capital which have been well documented, and no doubt Jeff talked about that a little bit, which just makes it very hard for us to scale at that level. And it's about investors' appetite for pre-revenue, pre-profit businesses in Europe, which is very different to the mentality in Silicon Valley.
Is a smaller company in the sharing economy, like your own, or at least when you started, dependent on a big incumbent coming in and working together with you? We've seen it a lot. You with Wyndham, Hilton have got in, a number of big old-fashioned companies, if you like, have got in. How important is that?
It was very important for us to take the business to the next stage to access a few things. One was obviously greater capital, and there's only a certain number of people within Europe that can write a particular check size that you need once you get past your Series A. The second was, as an entrepreneur, you need to be savvy about how you drive scale. And actually, the dirty secret about many sharing economy businesses is they're incredibly unglamorous. So really what I'm growing is a call centre. It's call centre and customer service. Now, there are people who have very established businesses that have been doing that for years, that are located in parts of the world that are not central London, it's obviously not the perfect place to grow a call centre in W1. So finding a way, for me, the decision was how can I access capital, but how can I access expertise, and also how can I access a potential membership base. When you're scaling up the business and you're completely focused on customer acquisition, there are some hacks and some shortcuts. And Wyndham, which is the travel business that invested in Love Home Swap a year ago, which owns Wyndham, the hotel business, and also Ramada and Travelodge, but additionally they own RCI, the timeshare business, and actually a lot of what we provide is a reinvention of timeshare. So being able to access their 2.5 million timeshare owners globally,
sure.
And one assumes that some of them are going to be Love Home Swap members, was part of the decision-making process.
Could you have done it without them? Or I imagine it would have just taken longer.
I think it would have taken longer.
Do you feel, and apologies, this is a little provocative, but do you feel as an entrepreneur with that entrepreneurial spirit that you sold out a little bit, letting the big player come in?
No, because I'm very pragmatic and I have investors and I'm motivated by a number of things that define success, but one of them is making money. And the way that you make money as a startup is not through the money that you earn on the journey, which is, a pittance. And actually, most of the time, when I started Love Home Swap, I, invested a lot of my own money to get it off the ground. So we should be clear that we build businesses for exit. If we're not building a business for exit, then we shouldn't take any investment along the way.
Yeah.
And having a partner in the mix that is, a likely or indeed one of a few, but in a pretty pole position to be an exit for the business, I think is a responsible way to scale
it. What about a big company sucking out the entrepreneurial spirit? Is there a danger of that happening? The entrepreneurial spirit that actually got the business going and kept the excitement going and the momentum going?
I think it's a partnership, and it's all about, as the CEO and the founder, how you navigate it. A startup is only as good as its culture. If we let our culture slip, then we won't keep our people, and we won't keep the essence of what it is that makes our company different for the people that work there. And as a startup, you're only as good as your team. Otherwise, you don't really have anything. And so putting that first and foremost is important. I think we're very lucky with Wyndham that actually they're incredibly hands-off. They're also not based in the UK, although they do have an office in Kettering, where we spend some time. So they leave us to it, and I think that they are experienced enough and their focus is on not, as they would define it, breaking our business. And they like it. And I think when businesses of that scale, it's an enormous business, it's got a $10 billion market cap, it's very long established, come to our funky little office with slogans on the wall and everybody busy and running around and developing product very quickly. That's what they've bought into, and I think that they get a kick out of that. And actually, if you look at the reasons why businesses like theirs and other hoteliers that you've referenced, Hilton, Hyatt, who've invested in One Fine Stay, why are they doing it? Part of it's obviously to access audience, but I think it's also to access energy and IP. Some of the things that we've recently built, like our mobile offering and our Flexi Points, have universal application across the Wyndham Group, but I think they would be the first to say they couldn't have built them internally. They want you to be able to hothouse development at pace.
A lot of this, imagine a huge part of this, when you think about it, is about excess capacity. Using that excess capacity in a number of different areas, a number of different ways. Where I want to come on to you as an investor. Where are the biggest opportunities do you see now in this space? ones that maybe we haven't talked too much about? Because
Yeah.
clearly we talk about fashion, we talk about
Yeah.
food, we talk about apartments. What else are you looking at? What excites you?
I would think two answers to that with my investor hat on. So firstly, and not exclusively, but the last 3 investments I've made, because I found this very weird because I feel like I can't see anyone, but maybe we turn around in a minute, have been in women. I am a firm believer in the fact that women still can't access capital in a way that is meaningful for female entrepreneurs. And as a female entrepreneur, you have a responsibility to pay it forward. And so I seek out women to invest in, and they seek me out because I speak on platforms like this about how important it is. So the last 3 businesses that I've backed have all been female founders. They've actually not been sharing economy platforms. They've been Internet of Things businesses, but with an application where I think I can help. And the criteria for me when I do invest is generally, the most important thing is, do I love the founder? Because I know from my own experience that ideas change all the time, but you've really got to believe that the person who's starting the business above anything has got the grit.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that I look for, because you can have days and days and weeks and months where there's loads and loads of news and none of it's good, and it's all about how you deal with that. And then can I help them? So do I understand the space? I've got a pretty good address book. How can I open that up? How can I help them out? So that's what I think about in terms of investing. In terms of the sharing economy, we're seeing really interesting innovation in B2B, in the unsexy bit of the sharing economy. So in healthcare, logistics, and back office applications. Again, for me, and there's a business that I'm slightly sort of cooking up a little bit in this space, so I shan't disclose much more. But I think, and again, it sort of sounds like I only have one topic, but nonetheless, women in the sharing economy for me is the huge untapped potential. All of our sharing economy research shows that 65% of people participating in these platforms are female. I think what will absolutely change the future of work is if we can empower women who are out of the world of work because they're at home with children to work differently. And I think that ideas that harness that and tap into that, I would actually challenge the notion that much of the innovation in sharing economy has been in fashion and food. I don't think it has. I think it's primarily been by men, for men. It's been very functional. It's been about cars and come and assemble my IKEA furniture. I think that there's lots more innovation which can be driven by women, and I feel excited about
And this is a business that you're developing yourself?
Yeah. Okay.
When are we going to hear about it?
Soon. I'm quite busy at the moment, but I'll get there.
You mentioned grit just then. What do you think is more important? That grit, the day-to-day grit and the day-to-day pushing things forward, or the entrepreneurial spirit in your blood, which clearly you had through the family, etc.?
Yeah. Look, you've got to want it, 'cause it's a horrible life. And it's a very weird life because you take yourself out of the norm. So for me, I studied at Oxford. I worked as a management consultant. I set up my first business at 25, knowing nothing. You take yourself out of the norm at a young age. None of your peers do what you do. My peers generally still don't do what I do. You don't earn any money, and you generally have to invest your own money, and you're not necessarily always going for the moonshot, but you're definitely going for something which is a long-term goal. It takes an awful lot of self-discipline and self-motivation to keep going. So I think you've got to really want it, and I see a lot of people along the way who think they want it, but then they don't. The other thing to remember is this stuff is not quick, and I know that we get carried away because we read about Snapchat, we read about these businesses that take less than a year. My first business took 8 years. I believe that that's the average. I'm in year 5 of Love Home Swap now, and we're in a reasonably good place. But you've got to really be prepared for the long haul, and I think a lot of people aren't. The final point on that is many people launch business in partnership. I've done that in the past. It is harder to get out of a business partnership than it is a marriage. So you better bloody want to work with that person. And I see so many people at events like this who've met someone at a networking event and they've chatted a bit. To me, that just has disaster written all over it.
So stay away from that kind of partnership? Or just make sure you check it out very carefully?
Know them. Yeah. And the final thing on partnership is make sure that you have absolutely different and distinct skill sets, because the partner that you choose who sort of does what you do, and you will fall out with them because there'll be a perception that one person does it better than the other. I think be absolutely clear on what each person brings to the table, but remember that you are signing up to them for a very long time, and that people's lives change. And so my first business, my business partner in that business, who's a wonderful guy and still a great friend, but older than I was, and during that time he had 2 children and I was still single. So you know what life stages are like, and I know this stuff sounds very pragmatic, but you really need to think this through, because then your requirements absolutely change. So someone who has 2 small children and is earning no money in a startup has very different needs to someone who's sort of gaily skipping around London and is happy to wait for a few more years. And this is the stuff I see time and time again that breaks up businesses before you get to the end game. So just, give yourself the best chance.
Yes. Why you wrote this report? I forget exactly what the report's called.
It's called Unlocking the Sharing Economy. How could you forget?
I've got it written down here somewhere. Why were you chosen to write this report? Were you chosen to write this report?
I was,
Or did you put your hand up?
No, I was chosen. I think
is that because your business is so successful?
I think I have a profile and the business has a profile. I think the government became interested in the sharing economy, and I think that at the time I used to run a networking event called Collaborative Consumption Europe. That's what the sharing economy used to be called. And so for that reason, I suppose my head was above the parapet. And then when you start to engage with government, they like people who do what they say they're going to do and who are good at bringing other people with them, and I suppose I demonstrated that. And then a very standard government tool to use is to commission an independent report, to have a call for evidence, then they have to give a formal response. So that's not new, and in fact they did one last week with Julie Dean, who runs the English Satchel Company, on the nature of self-employment. So it's pretty standard fare. So you'd have to ask them why and whether they were happy with it.
Now, your business, you made an acquisition recently.
Yeah.
I think that made you the biggest in this space.
Yeah.
Apparently you plan more acquisitions this year or next or whenever. What are you aiming for? What size, in terms of scaling this business up, are you aiming for before you decide, that's it, I'm going to sell it and move on? And maybe go into government? Without wanting to put words in your mouth.
Well, we doubled in size last year and we plan to double in size again this year. And that will be through a combination of organic growth and acquisition. The acquisitions that we make are very driven by where we have inventory requirements. So we bought a Dutch business that had a lot of listings in continental or sort of mainland Europe. We're looking at potential acquisitions in the US. We have a French language version of the site. So it's very geographically driven, and also a little bit driven by where there might be a slightly different offer. So the business that we bought in Holland is called Home for Exchange. It's a slightly lower price point than ours, and that's quite interesting because it gives us ways of price testing that we can't do with our site. They also don't have some of the IP that we have that's driving our revenue around flexi points and an insurance product, so it gives us an opportunity to scale up their businesses separate.
But is it about, and I ask this question to every entrepreneur, is it about getting to a point and then selling out? And have you set a point in your mind, or are you enjoying running this business too much?
It's really fun. And also, I'm really lucky in that, so entrepreneurs generally have a short attention span, and I definitely require a lot of different things going on. And I'm really lucky that I get to scratch that itch because I'm CEO of a business that's absolutely transformed itself over the last couple of years. I have a US angle on my life, which I enjoy, and I'm there at least twice a month, and that's fun. I have all of the government work, which gives me another interesting lens. I chair a trade association that's gone from 19 to 50 members in 9 months, most of whom don't agree on things, so that's quite interesting. And I get to invest. So, I'm busy and happy, and it's fun.
What's the worst piece of advice you've had?
It's very easy for people to tell you that things won't work. It's much easier to say
which you heard a lot from VCs, right?
And I hear it all the time, and I've always been told that I can't do things. I think I'm very lucky in that, and I think about this as a parent, and a parent of a daughter as well as a son. I think it's quite easy to tell women that they can't do things. So I fundraised when I was pregnant. I worked with 2 tiny children who were in the office, and I was feeding them and all that sort of stuff. And when you look back on it, you sort of wonder how you did it. But I'm very lucky that I have an amazing network of female entrepreneurs who are, all of you will have heard of, the sort of Sarah Woods and Alex Pledge and Tamara Lohan and all those girls. And we're quite a crew, and most people have children, and everybody's making it up as they go along. And whenever I meet anyone who's a fledgling, I like men too, but I think that women need extra support, who are going through this generally in their 30s, which is when most people have enough wherewithal to start up a business, but it's also the time when most people are having families, and I'll always tell them that they can do it, because a lot of people told me that I couldn't.
Okay. I should mention at this point as well that Alex Pledge and Eileen Burbage, one of the big investors, of course, in this space, are going to be sitting on this stage with me in a couple of weeks, I think, 2 or 3 weeks.
Yes, well, they're great women, and they're great people, and very successful entrepreneurs, and I think they're a real lesson in how anything is possible. Alex, absolutely, having built a business and exited it. Eileen has 4 kids. I mean, they're amazing role models.
I've got to open it up to the audience in just a second, but let me ask you this question. It's a question I ask, again, I ask a lot of chief executives of companies about purpose, their purpose. Now, forgive me if I get this wrong and make assumptions, but for young businesses, entrepreneurs, it's about succeeding and making money, getting the investment, et cetera, et cetera. For a lot of big businesses and established businesses, whether it's the Apples of the world, they are in a position, people like Tim Cook, to turn around to short-term investors and institutional investors and say, you know what, if you don't like what we stand for in this world, be it sustainability, be it a bigger purpose, then don't invest in our stock. Do you have a purpose? Do you have that long-term purpose, that long-term goal where you stop thinking about investment for the short term?
I think you have to stand for something. I think I've always felt like that. But that might change over time.
So what do you stand for?
So I think at the moment, given that I run Love Home Swap, then I genuinely believe that you can change the world through the power of sharing, which sounds a bit wanky, but what that's meant to mean is that I really believe that people can have a better quality of life, experience the world more, travel more, have more fun if they share their homes. And I believe that because I do it all the time, and I want to build a business that helps other people to do that. I think the bigger picture for me as a personal mission, and this is something my children get rammed into them all the time so they could play it back to you, is that you have to be the best you can be. I feel that about myself, and if I don't feel like I'm being the best I can be, then I don't like that.
Yeah.
What that means and how you define that, I think, is just about feeling that at any given moment or in any given week, on balance, you're being the best version of yourself possible. And I'm never short on motivation, but I think holding that goal and holding yourself to account on that is important for me personally.
Do you think, Debbie, that these business models, the models we're talking about in the sharing economy, these young businesses, are better for society than, another big question, but are better for society than the incumbent models which you guys threaten?
Well, I would challenge that we threaten incumbent models. Actually, the data doesn't demonstrate that. So if you look at hotel occupancy during 2015, it was up 26%. So I think it's a bit of a myth that these businesses are here to destroy the old way of travelling. I think Uber is in a slightly separate category.
I mean, the incumbent businesses won't agree with that.
I'm not even sure that that's true, because I think what we will see, just the point on the sharing economy and travel, which is my world, is much like the other seismic shift in the online travel industry of 15 years ago, which, if you can remember, back to then when we were children, obviously, you had travel agencies and then you had online travel businesses, and they were complete. And now it's insane to think that it was ever that disconnected. Yeah. I think that that's what we'll see with the sharing economy. I think it will just be organised as a different way to stay and travel, and it will become much more integrated. We won't refer to it in the same way as we do now in 10 years' time. Yeah.
Do you ever worry, final question from me, do you ever worry, and this is a business model based very much on trust, That's the currency, isn't
Yeah.
it? Do you ever worry that something can happen, and look, we've seen examples of it happening, which will really threaten that business model fundamentally, and we'll either revert back to where we were before or have to start again somehow?
I don't think so. For Love Home Swap, those issues around trust are not really issues for us because everybody has some skin in the game. So a good analogy would be, if you're driving your own car, you're driving your own car. If you're driving a hire car, then you're on holiday and there's sand in the back and you're not in sweet wrappers and all the rest of it. If you're driving your friend's car, then you're absolutely on best behaviour, and that's what we find in terms of home swapping, that actually everybody ups their standard. And I know, having done a home swap in half term 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of running around sorting the house out and making sure it was all perfect for the home.
Well, you want people to treat your home like you treat theirs, right?
Totally. So actually we square off those trust issues. So with my industry hat on, and as a separate point, we're developing the world's first trust mark for the sharing economy, partnering with Oxford University and PricewaterhouseCoopers and various others to put this in place. So I think having some kind of externally verifiable standard is an important part of the industry growing up.
Like a kite mark, you mean,
Exactly.
for accredited sharing economy?
And we're piloting that in the spring of this year.
Okay.
But I think in my day job, it's not the thing that keeps me awake at night. There are other issues.
Debbie Wosskow, everybody.